Hey friends, welcome to Thus Saith the Lord. I'm Gene Lloyd and I'm glad you're with me today for some more biblical interpretation. Did you know that Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy? Well, of course he does. What else would he do? But that famous verse that contains this phrase, it's not pointed at who you might think. So stick around and see what it really means. So John 10:10 says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." Okay, who's Jesus talking to here? Who's he referring to when he says the thief? Before we go any further, let's just take a second really quick, and I'd ask you to subscribe and to follow and to like so we can continue to get this content to as many people as we're building something new here. Help us out. Hit all those buttons for us, okay? Now, when we get to this verse, the first question we should be asking is, who is the thief? See, a lot of times with Bible verses, we can read it, and there could be a question that comes out of it. We should read it and ask ourselves questions about what it's actually saying. So in this case, we should wonder right away, who is the thief? Well, I'll tell you, if you just jump into this verse by itself, you're not going to know who the thief is. Even if we read a few verses before and a few verses after, it kind of answers the question, but it doesn't really give us the full context. In this case, we have to read even further back. And to get the full context on this one, you've got to go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 9. Okay, now remember, chapters and verses were added long after these documents were written. So the story sometimes spreads across multiple chapters. So in this case, we got to go back to chapter 9 to figure this one out. So why don't we read that together, chapter 9. I'm going to read verses 1 through 7. Let me pull up my Bible app here. Okay, this is talking about Jesus. It says, "As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' And Jesus answered, 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is still day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he said this, okay, this is a key piece of the story here. When he said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with saliva. That's disgusting. And then he rubbed it on the man's eyes. That's even more disgusting. And then he said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. Okay, that's the beginning of our context for this passage. That's the beginning of what we're seeing here, okay? Now, if we keep reading, what we find is that his neighbors were shocked that he could see. And he eventually ended up in front of the Pharisaical leaders, and they didn't believe him. And they called his parents in. And they also didn't like that Jesus was involved. Okay, that's probably the real reason they didn't believe him, because Jesus was involved. And so they asked the parents, and they asked the guy again, and the parents were like, "Hey, he's been blind since birth." And they're like, "Are you sure?" And they're like, "Hey, we're his parents. I think we would know." Okay, I'm adding a little bit there, but you get the point. And then after some arguing, what did the Pharisees do? They did the very nice thing of kicking the man and his parents out of the synagogue. They put them out. They weren't allowed to come back to the synagogue. Can you imagine that? A guy gets healed, and then all of a sudden you're not allowed to go to the synagogue anymore. Okay, so we fast forward a little bit. Jesus goes looking for this guy. I wish we knew his name, but we don't. Jesus goes looking for this guy in verse 35, and he reveals to him that he's the Messiah. And then he chastised the blindness of the Pharisees. He spoke about how there was a spiritual blindness. He kind of spoke in a kind of an analogy. And some of the Pharisees overheard Jesus, and that's when he started teaching about being a good shepherd. Now this is the context of what is said later, okay? So the Pharisees started this other conversation, and it continues into chapter 10. So Jesus is addressing the Pharisees and comparing them with people who steal sheep. Okay, so when we get back to John 10:10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. In context, Jesus is actually talking about the Pharisees. He's talking about the religious leaders. Okay, he's calling them thieves for trying to keep the sheep from getting into the kingdom, so to speak. All right, And I'd like to suggest that those Pharisees were being influenced by the enemy, or had been previously influenced in a way that formed their hyper-religious perspectives. Now, okay, we can all agree Satan definitely comes to kill, steal, and destroy. We can see those actions throughout Scripture. But in this verse, and in this instance, the context is Jesus is referring to the Pharisees. And this really highlights the importance of reading the entire context of a passage. In this case, we had to go all the way back to another chapter. And sometimes that happens where we have to go a few chapters back or even a few chapters forward to fully understand it. So don't sell yourself short. Read as much as you need to understand the Scripture, okay? Now make sure you follow the link below. I've got a free article on this that goes a little bit deeper. It'll help you line up some of those key verses. Now, thus saith the Lord, that's my perspective on this passage. And I hope, as always, you've learned something new today. Maybe you heard others teach this passage incorrectly before. Now you have it straight. I'd love to hear your comments below. I want to hear about what you think. Let me know, again, if you disagree or if you have a different perspective. I love having conversations with others about biblical interpretation, so please leave your comments, and I'll see you next time.